On October 8, 1987, Ken Hay, accompanied by his wife, went to visit his parents, John and Ruth High, in the Woburn neighborhood of Houston, Texas. Ken had previously tried to contact his parents by phone, but neither of them answered, prompting him to check on them in person. When he arrived at the house, he knocked several times on the door, but there was no response. Ken also tried to peek inside the house and saw his mother lying on her bed in the bedroom, thinking she was unconscious or possibly worse. Ken immediately contacted the police, who dispatched units to the Hay residence. The officers noticed a pile of newspapers at the door, indicating the couple hadn't left their home for several days, which was unusual. The police decided to force the door open and check on the elderly couple. Upon entering the house, the investigators detected a strong smell of gas. It appeared the couple had accidentally left the gas on, leading to their suffocation. The investigators quickly found John Hay's body on the floor, lying in a pool of blood, suggesting he had fallen face first. In the bedroom, Ruth's body was found on her bed, with no signs of assault. A book with a folded page lay beside her, indicating she might have fallen asleep while reading before suffocating from the gas. The investigators found no signs of forced entry on any doors or windows, and the couple's money and valuables were untouched. This led the investigators to initially believe that the elderly couple's tragic death was an accident. However, this theory was questioned when they learned that John Hay had spent 50 years working for an oil company, implying he was knowledgeable about such hazards and unlikely to make such a mistake. Was the couple's death simply a tragic accident, or was there a hint of foul play? The victims' bodies were sent to the forensic lab, where autopsies would provide answers. On October 9, 1987, the forensic lab issued its autopsy report on the two victims. The report revealed that John had been struck at least 6 times on the top of his head, killing him instantly, making it impossible for his injuries to have resulted from a simple fall. As for Ruth Hay, doctors found a wound on her lower lip and front teeth, and her cause of death was due to a lack of oxygen to the brain, indicating she had likely been suffocated with a pillow. For the investigators, the forensic lab report left no room for doubt that what happened in the High family home was not an accident, but a full-fledged criminal act. They now had to identify the person responsible. The investigators began by re-examining the High family home more thoroughly, and this time they found more evidence confirming a criminal suspicion behind what happened to John and Ruth High. They discovered an axe handle behind the curtain in John and Ruth's bedroom, which was identified as the murder weapon used to beat John to death. Additionally, they found remnants of a candle that had burned to the end, leading them to believe that the perpetrator had lit the candle and opened the gas in the house, thinking it would cause a fire and destroy most of the physical evidence against him. However, it seemed the perpetrator was not knowledgeable about gas, which typically rises, resulting in the candle burning out completely without setting the house on fire. In the victim's home, the investigators also found a few pages of John and Ruth High's will, which revealed that their sons, Ken and Gary High, would inherit about $500,000 after their parents' death. This discovery led the investigators to suspect the victim's sons, Ken, who initially reported the incident to the police, and his brother Gary. Consequently, the investigators began scrutinizing their backgrounds closely. They learned that Ken, the elder brother, lived an ideal life. He was married, a father of 2, successful in his career, and well regarded by everyone. However, he was not close to his younger brother Gary due to Gary's sexual orientation. Naturally, the investigators questioned Ken, who informed them that the last person to see his parents alive was a man named Chuck Duncan, who was Gary's business partner and close friend. Chuck was also close to Ken's parents, as he was often asked to do various tasks for them, and his presence in their home was not unusual. The investigators intensified their inquiry into Chuck Duncan and soon discovered that Chuck's relationship with Gary was much more than just a partnership and friendship. The two were lovers and had a third partner named Robbie Duncan, who was also their sexual partner. The peculiar relationship among the 3 men particularly intrigued the investigators. Chuck considered himself the leader, and the others submitted to his will, allowing him complete control over them. The three young men ran the same business together, shared one bed, and lived as if they were married. Chuck's control over his colleagues became evident during the investigators' questioning. Ruby explained to the investigators that he changed his name to Ruby Duncan to be closely associated with Chuck, similar to how a woman is linked to her husband in American culture. Chuck told the investigators that he often spent time with the elderly couple at their home, but he wasn't there at the time of the crime. When asked about the will found at the crime scene, Chuck said that John and Ruth had confided in him that they intended to disinherit their eldest son, Ken, and leave all their possessions to their younger son, Gary. Chuck's statement pointed the finger at Ken, as he would benefit the most from his parents' deaths before they could change their will. The investigators also questioned Gary Hay, who admitted to having an unusual relationship with both Chuck and Ruby. Gary was surprised when the investigators asked about Chuck's claim regarding the will, indicating he had never heard about it before. Gary Hay and Ruby Duncan were excluded as suspects after investigators confirmed they were in Seattle at the time of the crime, exploring new job opportunities. As a result, the investigators were left with Ken Hay and Chuck Duncan, each suspecting the other. The investigators spent a month investigating both men but couldn't find any evidence linking either to the crime, leading the case to go cold and be archived until new evidence emerged. 5 years after the crime, in August 1993, an anonymous caller contacted the police, claiming to have information about the murder of John and Ruth Hay. The investigators identified the caller by his voice as Ruby Duncan, who revealed that Chuck Duncan was the one who killed the elderly couple that night. Ruby told the investigators that he had separated from Chuck, which prompted him to reveal the secret. He indicated that Chuck believed he could secure millions through Gary after inheriting his parents' wealth. While Ruby and Gary were in Seattle, Chuck called Ruby in a state of distress, confessing that he had just killed Gary's parents to expedite Gary's inheritance, significantly benefiting their joint venture. Based on this confession, Ruby was supposed to face charges for obstructing justice and concealing Chuck's crime. However, the authorities struck a deal with him, granting him immunity in exchange for helping them obtain a recorded confession from Chuck. On February 3, 1994, investigators recorded conversations between Chuck and Ruby. Chuck was too smart to make a clear confession to the crime, but he hinted in multiple ways about his role in it, indicating that if he fell into the hands of the authorities, it would implicate both Ruby and Gary as well. Despite all the evidence gathered against him, it was circumstantial. The prosecution decided to arrest Chuck Duncan for first-degree murder. When Chuck realized that going to court was inevitable, he changed his story and admitted to killing the Hay couple, but claimed it was a mercy killing. Chuck explained to the investigators that Ruth Hay and her elderly husband were suffering from age-related illnesses, and it affected them so much that Ruth asked Chuck to end their lives mercifully and make it look like an accident. Of course, the prosecutor was not convinced by Chuck's story and proceeded with their case. Despite the weakness of his narrative, Chuck stuck to his claim that Ruth had asked him to do it. The trial of Chuck began on May 2, 1995, and Ruby's testimony on May 5 was crucial in convicting Chuck, along with the recorded conversations, and above all, Chuck's confession wrapped in the mercy-killing story. All these factors ultimately led to Chuck being convicted of murdering John and Ruth Hay, and he was sentenced to death, which was carried out by lethal injection in 2003. On the day of his execution, Chuck maintained his innocence using the same story. What do you think, dear viewer? Is it possible that Chuck was telling the truth and that Ruth Hay did ask him to end her and her husband's lives? Or is he just a madman who deserved the sentence he received?